I'm curious just what your thoughts are and in the kind of leapfrogging from antivirus to next gen AV.
I mean, the thing with next gen AV that we find is it needs to be part of a solution, not a software choice. Too often we see someone's like, okay, here's the name brand, I'm going to go buy it. It's like, okay, great, but what's it really going to do for you? And how does it mesh with everything else that you have? We've got one next-gen vendor that some of our clients work with that when we try to rig it into their SIEM or SOCs, we run into issues where this supposed next-gen vendor that is totally cloud compatible, helps with the work from home. If I want to get the logs out of it, I have to go build a crappy Linux appliance, implement it in my own data center. It'll periodically go out and pull the cloud vendor, suck it down to a flat file, and then convert that to syslogs that it'll slowly at some random interval parse out to my SIEM system. Okay, I had next-gen AV, but that's not really useful at that point because I can't really get the proper alerts out of it. Or we find that some of the next-gen AVs are assuming that you're going to go dedicate a human to stare at a screen. And so we find it's like, okay, if everyone's working from home, we don't have time to stare at dozens of screens. We need next-gen AV that's actually going to pick up and do something. Yeah. So the thing that we look at from a next-gen AV is, one, it's that AI driven. Two is that it's got some kind of dedication. We are starting to run into more and more of things that class themselves as next-gen AV, but then some of them want to be an EDR or an MDR or one of the new acronyms. And it's like an unholy alliance of advanced antivirus and some logging and some thread control and some host intrusion. And when we look at those systems, what we usually find is they're tweaked down so low because they're so chatty and annoying that you kind of lost some of the impact because you're not a DoD skiff where you control everything, right? You've got people at home who just scream, at the bosses that they can't do their job, and IT gets told, go turn it off or go make it be quiet. And so from a next gen aspect, our point of view is you need to figure out what you want to get out of it. The big thing that we want to see come out of a next gen AV is ultimate 0-day sandboxing. I want to see
that's important because a lot of vendors use that word sandboxing. Mm-hmm. And people think of a small little child sitting in a sandbox throwing sand at someone.
Yep.
And how do you define sandboxing?
So the sandbox has to be multiple layers.
My son, I should say.
The sandbox has to be multiple layers. It has to run through multiple different styles of sandboxing. It should be doing it all at the same time. If the vendor can't give an SLA for that, then you should not be using that vendor. But it should hit multiple sandboxes all at the same time. The sandboxes have to be able to hide from the bad guys. A lot of them don't. There's a lot of ransomware that once they see you looking, they just uninstall themselves, which is great for you, bad for actually catching the bad guy. But it's got to have those different layers of sandboxing, and it has to be advanced enough that they are searching for things like eternal blue attacks, side channel attacks, things like that. Sure. You're not just looking for a file that calls a process. You have to be looking for something that does a memory-based attack or a chip-based attack, and you want to be able to see that. To us, that's the most important part of a next-gen AV. There are a lot of simpler, easier ways to do other types of controls that are a bit more helpful. Because this is one of the few cases where the Swiss Army knife style solution tends to not do anything well. And that's almost worse than having 2 or 3 key products that do their job well and having some gaps in the others, which is the opposite of when we talk about firewalls, where we're like, okay, time to make the world simpler. This is your edge. It's been running this way for a couple of decades. We can use a UTM. That's our Swiss Army knife for our firewalls. Even if it's out at Azure or AWS, that's good. Next Gen AV is so new and endpoints are changing so rapidly. That's one of the cases where you need the best of breed for that, not a solution that kind of does half-ass a bit of everything.
Now, I've come up with these analogies recently, but in finance, you rarely see in the small mid-market finance department holding all of capabilities in-house themselves. Usually they're outsourcing some component, whether it's tax filing, payroll to a payroll service, or possibly accounts payable. But they're in the same thing legal. Rarely are they going to have a full suite of legal in-house. You're going to be partnered with a law firm to provide expert help and such. where are you seeing on some of the themes, the four of the themes we've talked about, where are you seeing through the 100 plus assessments we've done, the most struggle happening with the talent gaps and all the issues?